It is wonderful to have all of you here at the Richard Nixon Library, and I know that this is the inaugural event for the new center that we're opening at Chapman for free expression and media integrity. I'm sure that will cause some interesting debate, especially the media integrity part. But I think also when I think of free expression, I really think of the American troops and all who serve in uniform and the role that they play to keep our country free and to keep free speech free. So for anyone in the room who has served, will you please stand up so that we can give you a round of applause, and whether you've served in the military or the police or firemen or any uniformed service, thank you very much for your service. We thank you for your service. We wouldn't be here without you tonight. So I'm Christopher Nixon Cox. I'm a board member at the Richard Nixon Foundation, and I also happen to be President Nixon's grandson. And very proud grandson, I might add as well. Very proud of my grandfather and his achievements. I'm also very honored to be here tonight with Daniele Struppa, who is our new board member at the Nixon Foundation. And clearly the very popular president of Chapman University. You're doing a great job for the Nixon Foundation and Chapman. So I also need to point out that Sandy Quinn is here. And he is a great friend of the Nixon family. He goes back to the pre-presidential days. And he just told me that, he told my mom actually, that I'm a lot more comfortable now speaking in front of a crowd than I was when I was 10 years old. So that just shows how long Sandy's been around. But Sandy, thank you for being here. We really appreciate having you as well. So I'm very excited tonight because the Nixon Foundation has such a great relationship with Chapman University. It's really a unique partnership focusing on scholarship, research of presidential history, and I know we're doing some new things. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about them or not, but certainly with the arts and other things that we're looking to partner with Chapman on, it's a really unique relationship. So we're so thankful for that, and we're so thankful that we can have this really special event here tonight, this inaugural event, in partnership with Chapman. Chapman has been a great friend of the Nixon Foundation, and we're just really thrilled to have you here. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And, you know, thank all of you for being here, because you know what? I love this Nixon Library and the Nixon Foundation because, of course, it's about my grandfather and his legacy. But what really makes it special is seeing each and every one of you here. You make it special. And it's events like this tonight that make the Nixon Library unique. This is an event where we will get to explore and debate great ideas and great topics that are on the minds of Americans. And if it weren't for all of you here tonight, this wouldn't be possible. So it's events like this and people like you who make the library so proud, make the library so special. So I'm very, very honored and proud to be here. But it's also a little bit nerve-wracking for me to be here because my job tonight, not only to welcome you, is to introduce Dr. Lisa Struppa. And the reason why I'm a little nervous is that she is the dean and a professor of communications at Chapman College. Yes, that's great. And she has invited Sarah Sanders, who is, I think, one of the great press secretaries that we've ever had, also great at communications. And we're hosting an event on communications with lots of people who really know how to communicate well. So what am I doing talking to all of these people? They know far more than I do about communicating. So I'm a little nervous about being here tonight, but I know it's going to be a great evening. So when I started to look at Dr. Struppa's resume and her biography, I was reminded of a quote by Margaret Thatcher. And Margaret Thatcher said, "In politics, if you want anything said, ask a man. If you want anything done, ask a woman." And the reason I say that is because when looking over Dr. Struppa's resume, you really see someone who's a doer. She may be an expert in saying and communicating, but she is truly a doer. She is the inaugural dean of the School of Communication and an endowed professor at Chapman University. Prior to founding the school in 2016, she served as chair of the Department of Communication Studies and founding head of and master of the Science Graduate Program in Health and Strategic Communication in Chapman. She's published over 150 scholarly articles and edited over 12 books. For a layperson like me, that sounds like a lot, so I'm very impressed by that. But I also think it's important to note that she's very deeply rooted in the Orange County community, serving on the board of directors of the Laguna Playhouse, and until recently on the board of the Susan G. Komen Foundation of Orange County, and as a trustee of Area 5 of the Orange County Board of Education. So Dr. Sparks is a doer. So with a resume like this, it's no wonder that you hear her 3 daughters, who I'm sure she's very proud of, when they talk about their mom, say, if anyone can fix anything, it's mom. So we're very proud to have you here tonight, Dr. Strupa. The stage is now yours. Please come up, and we look forward to your remarks. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you, Chris, for your kind introduction and support. I would like to welcome everyone to the launch event for the Center for Freedom of Expression and Media Integrity. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We're very excited about our event tonight. I want to thank the Nixon Library and all the Nixon Library staff and Nixon Foundation staff for helping us to organize the event. I'd like to thank Chapman University staff as well. It's really been a team effort to bring everyone here to have this event for you all tonight. I'm sure you're thinking, what is the purpose of the Center for Freedom of Expression and Media Integrity? And we have a lot of things that we'd like to accomplish. This is our launch event, so we're really excited that you guys can be a part of this and share this with us. But let me just kind of tell you a little bit about what we think is the purpose, and it's evolving, it's not static. And so we welcome your ideas from the community members, ideas from students, and so forth as we launch the center, and it'll grow over the years. Essentially, free speech in America is at a crossroads, and the battleground for its future exists on college campuses and within media outlets, right? The Center for Freedom of Expression and Media Integrity, our goal is to advance and promote the ideals of free speech and balanced media, while at the same time monitor and challenge the media bias and assaults on free speech. So that is the core of the center. And I would add that the center right now has 3 major components. And one is the Great Debate Series, which is essentially what this event is about tonight. Okay, and it's about bringing people from different viewpoints and who have different ideas to debate and dialogue, and to have that in a form that's not chopped up into sound bites. So tonight's event is going to hope to accomplish that goal, and we'll continue to have more events like this over the next few years. The second part of the center is really launching how do we define media integrity? Right? From a research perspective, how can we take evidence and statistical analyses of defining and operationalizing media bias, media integrity, and all the terms around that, and what's happening with journalism these days? And through that research, can we then educate the public on accountability and responsibility in reporting, and what's the difference between opinion-oriented news and real journalism? Real journalism news, like when I was trained as a journalist back a long time ago. So that's the second part, and it'll be very much evidence-based and grounded in research. So that'll be really interesting to come. Look for some white papers around that. And then the third part of the center is really around launching our Bridge USA chapter, which is a student-led chapter, completely student-run. And so the students of Bridge USA will get to decide, following the rules of the larger Bridge USA national organization, following the rules, how do we learn to listen to each other? How do the students have dialogue with each other about the topic of the day, right? Things that you may see in the news. And really from a student perspective, ground up, having those discussions in a free setting, right? And so the center really is centered around, no pun intended, those major prongs at the moment. It will continue to evolve. We're super excited about seeing how that plays out. I will not take any more time at this point, so I want to end with a quotation from Steve Jobs, and it's the following. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. I think that's a really powerful quotation that also embodies what we're trying to do with the center. I think all of us involved with the launch of the center and the ideas behind it and the support behind it, and we want to thank our community leaders for helping to make this happen. You know, it really takes courage for all of us to stand up and unpack these ideas and principles. So all involved with the center and its mission are truly courageous, and I'm deeply appreciative for the outpour of support in what we aim to accomplish for our students and our community at large. Now let me introduce the most courageous and supporter love of my life, my amazing hubby, Chapman President Daniele Strupa.
Thank you, Lisa. It's such a pleasure to be here. I have to say it's been a real honor to be admitted part of the board of the Nixon Foundation, so now I consider this as my second home, Chapman being the first, and here is and it's so wonderful that we can partner together for events like this. So thank you to the entire board here and everybody at the Nixon Foundation for your friendship. Thank you, Lisa, for your introduction, and you know, I want you to know how proud I am that you had the vision for the creation of this Center for Free Expression. So this, you know, when I get up in the morning, yes, we can applaud. And by the way, she told me I shouldn't speak more than 3 minutes, so I'm gonna try to be a good husband and listen to the orders from the wife. So, but you know, when I get up in the morning, one of the first things I do, like most of us, I look at my phone, and the first thing that pops up is the Chronicle of Higher Education. And the article today on the Chronicle, the lead article, was the fact that last week, Columbia University canceled the panel on abuse of human rights in China. And they did it under pressure, obviously, from people who don't want that to be taught. So that is the first answer to the question that I always ask myself, do we really need a Center for Free Expression? And the answer is yes, we do. Statistics show, and you know, statistics are not always reliable, but they show that about 60% of the millennials believe that speech should be regulated. Even worse than that, 48% of Gen X and 47% of baby boomers, people like me, believe the speech should be regulated. A large number of Americans believe that we should maybe pass laws about, and this is a statistic that was actually published on the Washington Post, about limiting the freedom of the press, because we want to avoid press that is either emotional or biased or inaccurate, which of course would leave us very little to watch at home at night. So yeah, so we do need this, and you know, more than 50% of undergraduate students in the United States have been surveyed, and they say that it's okay to disrupt a speech by a speaker that they don't like. And then the question I always receive from my students, I talk to my students about free speech all the time, and one of the questions they come up with is, but President Strupa, why do you want to protect hate speech? And we know, not everybody does, but we, those of us in this room, know that hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. And the question is, why should we do that? And of course, you know, as parents, as spouses, we don't encourage negative speech from our kids, but there is a reason for that. Even if we agree that we're gonna curtail hate speech, the next step is the difficult one. Who decides what is hate speech? What is hate speech to me is passionate advocacy to somebody else. What is hate speech to some other people is art for me. So where do we draw that line? Is drawing this line that would make impossible for us to go to a comedy show. It would be impossible for us to appreciate modern art. It would even be impossible for us to voice dissent. So if we decide that we don't care about free speech, we have to kiss goodbye to art, comedy, dissent, open dialogue. And I think that that would be the greatest loss for our society. So I am committed as president of the university to free speech. We talk about that all the time, and I'm so proud that the School of Communication put this together. I'm really proud to invite to the podium the executive director for our Chapman University Center for Free Expression and Media Integrity, Brian Kaya.
That might be the warmest welcome I ever received, so thank you all very much, especially for my students. Thank you all so much for being here. As you know, free speech and media are two of the things that define me as a person, and they're so critical to both our community, but also our democracy. So I'm so happy to be able to lead the Center for Free Expression and Media Integrity at Chapman University, but I'm more excited that of the 500 people who are here tonight, over 150 are students. So let's give them a round of applause for being here as well. Many of my students, so you get extra credit. Just kidding. I don't want to get fired by Dean Sparks. So quick ground rules for this evening. So the point of the conversation tonight is civil discourse. And I'm sure that many of you in this room might disagree with certain things that you hear. Many of you in this room might agree with certain things that you hear. But I ask that you be respectful and recognize that the vast majority of people in this room came to listen, to understand, and to challenge, and not to be disrupted. If you want to disrupt us, then I will ask if that happens that you respectfully leave, because you have a time and place for disruption, but it's not going to be here tonight. I'm not going to let our event be ruined from a heckler's veto, respectfully. Thank you. With that said, I know you guys don't really care about me, so you want to hear our speakers. So without further ado, let me welcome our two speakers for this evening, Press Secretary Robert Gibbs and Press Secretary Sarah Sanders Huckabee. All right, well, we are all very excited that you're here. Thank you so much for doing this. I heard a rumor that it was either coming to speak at Chapman University or signing up for Dancing with the Stars.
We actually signed him up while we were backstage. So next season, he'll be ready.
That's all, well, that was actually Robert's joke. I stole it.
I would be on Dancing with the Stars for about 13 seconds before I got booed off. So
I might, if we have time, have you dance tonight. So before I go into questions with the two of you and then audience questions, a real quick note about audience questions. There are note cards at your seat. If you want to write a question down, write it, hold it up in the air, and we'll have folks who will come pick it up and give it to me. With that said, I wanted to have some opening remarks. You all know why we're here: civil discourse, media integrity, and free expression. Would one of you like to kind of give your thoughts to start?
Go ahead.
well, first, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. I think there are very few things that are more important than, I think, the freedom of expression. And I think it is so tremendously important that if we're going to have the types of debates that we have to have in a representative democracy, that we have to figure out how to get back to a discourse that is more civil, that allows people to sit across from each other and understand the difference in their viewpoints, but not question the integrity of those they sit across from. Because quite frankly, if we can't do that, we'll never make progress in this country on any issue. I think freedom of expression is also so important on college campuses because, and I was saying this earlier, this is for a lot of kids the first time they get away from where they've grown up. And they take with them a certain set of experiences and a certain set of beliefs and values. And for the very first time, they're sitting not at a dinner table with the same people that have those same set of experiences, but a collective group of experiences and values and thinking that allows them to challenge where they've come from and what they think and why. And it's imperative that we provide the space to do that. Because if we don't in this world, we're going to, I always stumble over it, but I call it the Amazonization of our politics. So you've probably all ordered a book off of Amazon. And if you order a book off of Amazon, you know there's that section underneath it that says, if you liked Where the Crawdads Sing, or if you liked The Nightingale, you'll love these 5 books. And it works really well if you're trying to find a good book. But if that's how we approach the discourse in our politics or in our beliefs, if I say, if you like Hannity, then you'll like O'Reilly, and you'll like Fox and Friends, or if you like Maddow, you'll like Chris Hayes, and if all we do is get into our silos and listen to and like what we already think and already believe, how are we ever going to approach the ability to try to think a little bit differently? And if, as I said earlier, and I'll wrap up with this, if we can't get past the demonization of the person that sits on the other side, it's really, really hard, because not one of our problems is like wine. None of them get better with age. Our public policy problems only get more complicated the longer we put them off, because we can't sit together and talk about them. So I'm excited to do this here tonight, and excited for the step that the university is taking to provide an even greater area with which this can happen for students. So thank you.
Some of you may be surprised, but I actually completely agree with literally everything he just said.
Don't worry, we'll fix this. We'll change that in a little bit. Don't worry.
Oh, yes, we will.
I thought we would set the tone right by me agreeing with you on everything from the beginning, but I'm sure that'll probably change a little bit over the course of the evening. But I think that it's such a great example that the two of us can sit here, and such an incredible thing that you all are doing here with Chapman University to bring people from different sides of the aisle to sit down and have a civil conversation about varying opinions. And I think it's a really incredible opportunity that you are creating such a special forum that allows for this type of discussion. I think it's something that is certainly needed in today's political climate that is so polarized and so angry so much of the time, that if we can take a step back and really listen to each other and have positive conversations, I think that there's a lot to grow from that. And so it's really important what Chapman University is doing through the Nixon Library and through the foundation, and it's an honor to be here, and really excited about being part of this conversation and the launch of this effort, and look forward to a great discussion, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun. So thank you so much for having us.
Awesome. Okay, so as my students can attest, and my mother who's here as well, I love controversy. It's my favorite thing. I was born into it, I feel like. So I want to start with some controversial questions, and I actually want to address controversy head on. So as you both probably already know or suspect, there were some social media posts, there were some stories that were very critical about us having this event, and even asked for us to rescind the invitation to one of the two speakers tonight.
I can't believe that would ever happen.
I'm so sorry.
And so I want to address.
I like how he didn't tell which one, so everybody just gets to wonder.
I'm just trying to be diplomatic. Sarah, I'm gonna start with you on this one. One of the things that was most evident in the criticism that came through about us inviting you was the idea that President Trump has said that the press is the enemy of the people. And in some of those emails or even stories, it was attributed to you as saying that as well and defending it. And the question was, and I'm just going to ask the question for those who had sent that, is why should we have you come speak if you view the press as the enemy of the people?
Well, I actually don't view the press as the enemy of the people, and haven't stated that. What I have said is that I do think that there is a big problem with fake news. I do think that's a real thing. I think it happens on both sides. I've experienced it heavily on one side, but I do believe it exists on the conservative and the liberal side. And I think it's a really dangerous thing in our society. I think bad information informs people to make bad decisions. And we have absolute responsibility to protect the freedom of the press and freedom of speech, but with that comes great responsibility. And freedom of the press doesn't mean freedom to make things up. It doesn't mean freedom to drive opinion and call it news. And I do think that informing America is absolutely vital to our success and vital to our democracy, but it has to be good information, and it has to be accurate information. And I think that so often we have blurred the lines between what is news and what is opinion, and we've got to get back to where there is a clear line of what is opinion and what is news, and I think we've lost a lot of that. We've lost a lot of accountability in journalism, and I'd like to see that come back. I think the president has done a great job. People can disagree with me on that, but I think that if you look at the country as a whole, we're doing tremendous. And I think that is because of this president and because of his leadership. However, 90% of the news about this president is negative. And I think if you look at what his success has been and look at all of the coverage, you wouldn't think that a single positive thing ever came out of the White House. And I just think that's a really fair part, or unfair and disservice to the American people.
Do you think? Do you think that that's because of the way he approaches media and his tweets?
I think it's because the media hates the president. I think they didn't want him to be president. They never wanted him to be president, and he became president. They said he would fail. They said the economy would collapse. It's booming. Everything they've said about this president has been wrong, and the media doesn't like to be wrong. And he calls them out. I think sometimes it makes that relationship much tougher and a lot more tense than it has to be. But that's who he is. He's a fighter. I think that's why the American people like him for the most part. The ones that do, they wanted somebody to come in and fight back against a media that they felt was totally out of control and didn't match up with a lot of the country's values and the policies that they wanted to see enacted.
Now, Robert, you would... So, Robert, you might think that you were free from controversy when coming into this event, but there was actually an article in the OC Weekly that wasn't so pleased with Sarah coming, but was also very unhappy that you were coming as well. And in that particular...
At least they were consistent.
Misery loves company, right?
And OC Weekly is one of the most consequential publications in Orange County, and one of the things that they said, why are you laughing? It is. I like the OC Weekly. I mean, I like the LA Weekly and the Irvine Weekly better, but I'm biased. So, but I think it's a fair point, and this was one of the main criticisms, which they were unhappy that you were being invited because when you were press secretary, you defended a drone strike that President Obama authorized that killed an American. So do you care to address that?
Yeah. So, well, I'm going to answer it in a couple different ways because there's two different drone strikes. One drone strike was on the leader of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. This was many years ago, Anwar al-Awlaki, who was a U.S. citizen who went to Yemen and became the commander for al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And he was killed in a drone strike, and he was an American citizen. I remember being asked by NPR, of all people. They said to me, I think the question was, how can an American citizen feel like they're not going to go, say, sit in a cafe in Italy and be killed in a drone strike?
Be careful with Italy. The president of Chapman's Italian.
I want to make sure it's okay for you to go to a cafe in Italy. So I said, first of all, is that a serious question? Because I said, just to be clear, and look, I got this on a bunch of campuses too. Like, how can you advocate? I said, look, let's be clear. This guy he renounced his American citizenship. He became a leader in al-Qaeda. I said, the risk you take of doing something like that and of coordinating terrorist strikes. You remember the Detroit bomber. You remember some of the bombings that happened in Africa. This guy was the ringleader of that. We shouldn't apologize for the fact that we took that person out. The mistake I did make, and I answered this as I was leaving a debate in the 2012 election, was that question was the question that this article probably referred to as his son was later killed in a drone strike. And I think my answer was, somebody asked me about it, put a video camera in front of it, and I said, well, I should have said I don't know the details because in reality I didn't. I'd gone from the administration. I did not know what the intelligence was on Anwar al-Awlaki's son. I didn't know that he was killed. And my answer was flippant, and I said, we all probably wish he'd had a better father. I shouldn't have said that. Not because he shouldn't have had a better father, he should have. That wasn't the part that was wrong. The part was, and I think this is the lesson that I would say is, I answered a lot of questions, and I was always happy with the fact that when you do a press briefing, about 3 hours later, the transcript comes out. Somebody in the office or you read the transcript. You think, okay, I don't have anything I want to change. Put the transcript out. And I took it as a point of pride that in the 2+ years that I briefed, I never had to take a transcript and annotate it with an asterisk and explain why the answer I'd given wasn't factually what I wanted to give. The mistake I made in that was I didn't know the background and I tried to answer the question. It was an answer I wish I hadn't given. It still, I'm sure, lives on the internet. His dad is a very bad person, and it wasn't a bad thing that I still don't know the circumstances, honestly, of his son. His dad was the leader of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and we all can sleep better that he's no longer with us. So.
Okay, so I have a couple more questions that I'll ask in a couple minutes in relation to all that kind of stuff, but I want to segue for a second into media bias, but particularly the term fake news. So we hear the president use fake news a lot. It's become something that is commonly referred to in media and discussions on cable news stations. Can you guys share your kind of definition and also opinion of fake news?
I'll go first. All right. Since I think my boss coined that term, I will take that one. I think fake news is information that is not correct, that is not accurate, or that is misleading, particularly purposefully misleading, or laced with so much opinion that it is not news. To me, that would be the definition. I talked about it a few minutes ago. I think it's a dangerous thing to provide the American public with factually incorrect information and not always validated information and call it news and call it facts.
And just as a follow-up, because we're actually doing a documentary being filmed here tonight, you're all famous, on misinformation and fake news. Would you
Trust me, it's not all it's cracked up to be.
Would you differentiate misinformation and fake news?
I think they kind of go hand in hand. I mean, that's my personal opinion. I think that they're very similar. I think misinformation, purposefully misleading, I think is different than just misspeaking or making a mistake, a typo. Those aren't the same things. But purposefully misleading people or pushing a narrative that isn't true, I would consider that to be fake news. Yeah.
Robert.
I get worried about this discussion because I feel like the definition of fake news has matriculated and widened in a potentially very dangerous way. Fake news started as a concept more appropriately if you go back into the 2016 races, and you'll see, people can set up a website, create a story, they'll say, hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots were found in a warehouse in Ohio. And you can put up that story on the internet, and you can sell ads, and you can make a ton of money. And it's not even remotely real. It never happened. There aren't these mysteriously uncovered, uncounted absentee ballots in a warehouse in Ohio. And there's great articles you can look on almost any source of some of these type stories where they'll interview people and they'll say, yeah, I was just messing around and realized I could make tens of thousands of dollars selling ads that are generated by algorithms on these websites. That to me is fake news, right? I get worried that we expand this definition into news where there's a mistake, news we don't like. Look, show me a press secretary that likes everything that's written about them, and I'll show you a press secretary who's not reading anything that's being written about them. And I remember walking out of the White House in just a week or two after, realizing I would get in arguments with people about words for no particular reason, right? And you'd think back and go, like, that's not even the point of the story, and I'm arguing this sentence structure, and it's just stupid, right? It's not even central to it. I get worried that we're going to take the very real and dangerous weaponization of untruthful information, and the weaponization, I mean, is coming from overseas by people that are seeking to undermine our democracy, and we're going to paper that very dangerousness over by worrying about if somebody makes a mistake, we call it fake news. And I will say this, we cannot have freedom of expression and a rational civil discourse without some basis of fact and truth. We can, if all we're trying to do is structure a system where we have a civil discourse, but that civil discourse isn't based on some foundation of what is true and what isn't, then it's just talking to talk. And there's no particular utility in that, and there's no reason to have a center or a freedom of that. Let's have a discourse that's based on good faith, good dealing, truth and fact, and then we'll be able to make progress. But let's be very careful that we say, I didn't like that story in the Washington Post, I didn't like that story in the New York Times, I didn't like that story on Fox News, it's fake news. I remember, and I was telling this story, I remember being on the road in 2007, and all of a sudden these stories would pop up. We used BlackBerries then. I'll explain it to you later. And I kept seeing this story that Barack Obama was born in Kenya. And I picked up the phone. I remember we're on the bus, and I called back to the headquarters, and I'm like, this thing keeps popping up in my clips. I don't know what in the hell it is. This is the silliest, craziest thing I think I've ever could imagine. And I talked to the research director, what do we have? What do we have? And she said, well, the state of Hawaii gives you a copy of your birth certificate. That's the highest documentation that you can get from the state of Hawaii. I said, you have that copy? Yes. Scan it, put it on the internet, create a link for it, put it on the website. And here's how dumb and naive I was. This is 2007. I thought it was solved. I thought I've got from Hawaii a replica of the birth certificate that says Barack Obama was born in Hawaii. It was like 2014 when that story finally somewhat subsided. But my guess is if I did a poll in Ohio right now, I bet I'd find 20% of the people who would tell you that Barack Obama was born in Kenya. That's both a mistake and fake news, but that's fake news. But that's what fake news.
I think you hit on a really great point about just completely fabricated stories and how quickly they can spread due to social media and the amount of access that everyone has to information. And that's why fake news can be such a dangerous thing, is once it's out there, it can take weeks, if not months or years, before you can ever correct that story. And that's why I think it's so important that we have accurate information that's out there. And with the ability for anyone who has a phone or a computer to be able to create something that looks like news and put it out and disseminate it, it's a really scary thing, particularly when you have so many foreign countries that want to infiltrate and influence our elections and so many other things in our society, and they have that ability too. I think it's a really scary and a very dangerous thing to have so much access to bad information and the ability for it to spread so quickly.
And it becomes scarier when you have platforms that are bigger than, well, the biggest social media platform is larger than the population of the largest country on the planet. And they will tell you they can't stop this. Now, they also accepted ad buys in 2016, somebody paid in rubles. That's not fake news, by the way. Now, I don't know at some point why somebody's radar didn't go off that we're selling ads on Facebook and somebody's paying in rubles. So there is, when you take the weaponization of fake news and add in the weaponization of a platform that can circulate it to 2 billion people with the click of a mouse, you've got a dangerous cycle that can genuinely inflict some serious damage on our democracy.
So you've both kind of, shown that your concern around fake news, and also interestingly enough that how fake news or misinformation or fabricated stories can move their way around through social media and through mainstream media. But what do you do about it, particularly with social media? Would you guys, can we censor it? I don't think so, but I'm asking you.
Well, I think as it relates to certainly, what becomes even more dangerous about it on different platforms is now, it's one thing if Sarah's got her friend list on Facebook and I've got my friend list on Facebook and I say, I saw this article, I can't believe this, we should all get outraged, and I put that in my feed, or Sarah puts that in her feed. The danger now is I can pay to put that in Sarah's feed, right? There's an entire, obviously, the company's worth $500 billion for a reason. I think we have to look at the structure of how fact-checking is done, particularly around paid media, because I think if you don't put some guideposts in, I can't stop my sister-in-law's mother from sending me the email that says Barack Obama was born in Kenya, and did I know, and I'm not sure I really want to work on this campaign. But it's different if somebody can pay for that article to show up in her news feed and make it look like it's from a normal news organization. And I think if we don't begin to think about how we do some of that, I actually think the way Twitter handled it is probably actually not the right way to do it. They said, we're not going to do any advertising. There's no political advertising. I don't think that makes any sense. We have to have an engaged citizenry. We have to test ourselves on beliefs and issues. It also means you can't have advertisements on a whole host of issues that are important. I think, and I'm sure they do a lot less of it, and they can do it. Snapchat does some fact-checking, and I think we've got to institute some of that in this. And if you figured out a way to connect 2 billion people in this world, you can figure out a way to fact-check some political ads. And particularly if every time you do an earnings call, you emphasize the fact that the amount that is gained from this platform selling political ads is so small, yet they literally with the same breath will say, but our ads don't have that much of an impact. At the same time, they have case studies on the website that show what the impact was. You're worth $500 billion. You can figure this out, I can assure you.
I agree. You've got some of the smartest people in the world that work for some of these companies. I don't think censorship is the right answer, but I do think that they could put some accountability into the process and some type of a fact-checking system. Again, I think you make a great point. You created Facebook, from nothing, and it's revolutionized the way that people communicate. I think if you can do that, you can certainly figure out a way to have some sort of accountability process that goes through, particularly at least the paid advertising and some of the other media components of the system.
Okay, so you guys are getting along way too much. So let me see if I can ruin that. So
I thought it was all about civil discourse.
you could have civil discourse and still not get along. So question, and Sarah, I'm going to start with you, and then you guys can have some back and forth. Do you think that, since one of you is from the Obama administration and one of you is from the Trump administration, do you think that media has covered the Trump administration the same way it's covered the Obama administration?
No. However, that being said, I don't think that means that he didn't have difficult questions, that he didn't have anybody that pretends like the tension between the White House and the White House press corps is new, hasn't been paying attention. There's always been a contentious relationship at times between the White House and the press corps. They have very different jobs. And when you have a different objective, then there's going to be some friction. So I say that. However, I do think that this president has been covered completely unfairly and has been attacked from the very beginning, and oftentimes a completely out of control way. I also think that it goes beyond just the president. People in the administration, I think, and correct me if you feel differently, but I don't know that there are as many people in senior roles in the Trump administration that have become household names because they have been forced into the public eye, sometimes very unfairly and very much in a personal way. Addresses and home addresses published on media sites and encouraged to be protested and things like that in a very, very personal way. I've been attacked by the mainstream media. The LA Times reporter attacked my appearance. I got attacked at the White House Correspondents' Dinner while I was a guest on stage for my appearance, not for my job performance, but because of the way I looked. I think that level of attack to the staff is unprecedented for any administration. We talked about this earlier, but to my knowledge, I'm the first press secretary in the history of the country to ever require Secret Service protection because of the level of threats and the intensity with which the negative attention came. And so I think a lot of that is just because of the polarization of the country. I don't think that's all driven by the media, by any perspective, but I certainly think it has been enhanced and pushed by the media and their desire to come after this president in such a negative way.
One of the first things I did as press secretary was meet with the Secret Service and them explaining how they were going to install an alarm system in my house that connected to the basement control center for the Secret Service. And it's sort of a sobering meeting. My parents got letters. I once got a letter that mentioned my son. And I remember I went to see the Secret Service and I said, you're gonna need, if I ever find out who this is, you're gonna need a lot more guns than you have right now to stop me from doing something pretty crazy. I'd say the hyperbole has gotten way, way overstrung. We had really, we all have those hard days. I was saying this in the interview earlier. I mean, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but some of the toughest questions I got were from Major Garrett at Fox News, and not because Major Garrett was working at Fox News. Major Garrett's a really smart reporter. Jake Tapper was a really smart reporter, still is, and you get tough questions. I think the structure of how this White House is covered is different than the structure of the way our White House was covered. I do think that the way that I think Sean Spicer's first foray into the media was a lot more damaging than just a skit on Saturday Night Live for both the press and for the administration. And I think what's also fundamentally different, and I don't mean this in a bad way or a good way, it's just I think this is true, and I actually said this to Sean before he started. There's long been a strain on the conservative side and on the Republican side to run against the media. Right? I remember in 1992, I was in college, the Gore campaign, Clinton-Gore campaign, and I remember following my mother home one day, and I got out of the car, and I'm like, Mom, did you see what somebody put on your car? And she had a Clinton-Gore bumper sticker, but it said, actually somebody had put a sticker over it that said, annoy the media, vote for Bush. I think one of the reasons that the coverage is somewhat different is you also, in this current president, have a president that wants to run against the media. He wants to wake up every morning and fire up his base by complaining about or pointing out about or doing something that gets those folks riled up about something that's happening in the media. It's a talking point. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the reality of, because one of the things I told Sean, I said, one of the challenges you're going to have is you leave your office and go down to that briefing room, you've got to represent the administration. Stand behind that podium, you'd represent the administration. The challenge you have is when you walk out of that room, part of your job is you've got to represent the press inside that building. You've got to say, no, wait a minute, that photo op needs to be open. No, wait a minute, we have to have press come here. No, we have to stop and wait for them to come. You have to be their advocate. And I said, you're going to have that in a building in which some people are going to be distrustful of you because you're an advocate for them, because, quite frankly, there's a natural agitation around it. So I don't think this is all caused by Trump. I'm not saying that. But I think every morning you'll see, trust me, tomorrow morning it will happen. I can assure you, if it hasn't already happened, like right now. You know, he's going to get, I don't know if TiVo's a thing anymore, but he's TiVo'd, I can assure you, some late night Fox shows. He'll get ginned up. He'll watch some of the impeachment hearings, and that system will gin up. Now, the difference is, when I was in the White House, 22 million people watched the evening news. And that used to be what press secretaries, in this room in the White House, they'd set up a stage like this. The president would come out. He'd have the press corps as they are in the back. They'd have a nice event. You'd have your message of the day. And in the Reagan administration, 50 million people turned on one of the 3 networks, and that's how they got their information. And they told their friends about it. By the time I was in the White House, that 50 million had dropped to about 22 million. I looked this up on the way, 67 million people followed Donald Trump's Twitter account. 50 million people watched the evening news in 1980 when Reagan was president in a country of about 220 million people. The 22 million that watched it during the Obama administration were part of 310 million people. Right? So there's a platform that allows the president to communicate directly. He wants to communicate directly. They've structured it to where he communicates directly. But he also, trust me, he is happy to argue balls and strikes, and he's even happier to be the manager thrown out of the baseball game. It's part of what he does, and it's part of what keeps the balloon in the air.
I agree with part of that.
Now we're getting somewhere.
So I do think that you're right that the president uses that as a tool, but I think he has to. I think the press has created an environment that is so aggressively against him that if he doesn't use some mechanism, Twitter is usually the item of choice, and he has to have something that he can push back, that he can tell his side of the story, because so much of the news and so much of the coverage has none of his story in it. And I think it's actually a refreshing thing that you get to hear directly from the president where he is and what his thinking is at any given moment. Whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, I think it's a good thing that the leader of our country is so open with what he's thinking. And I think that's a positive thing that we have that access. didn't always make my job easier. So there were moments where we could have used without maybe a little bit of that access. I would have been fine without one or two of those items and those thoughts being out there. But I think the idea of that accessibility is a great thing. And I think it's revolutionized and changed the way that any person coming into that office will have to look at the presidency as a way to engage with the voters. And I think that's a positive thing that the president's brought.
No, I think the direct engagement is great. I was one of the first in our White House to join Twitter. It wasn't a big thing. It had been in the ether for 4 or 5 years, but it wasn't nearly the platform that it was. I joined after having watched a presidential press conference. Essentially, I sat on that side where the staff sits, and I sort of watched the Q&A in person and on Twitter, and I realized this was great because I didn't actually have to ask 15 reporters what they thought about the answer. They tweeted it all out. And I could figure out, all right, I don't have to talk to Sarah, I just have to talk to Brian. You can figure out sort of who you, that to me was the utility of it. But no, the direct engagement is important, and it always should be. I just think, you know, that some of the, I mean, you saw this last week at the, I mean, for all of the agenda setting that I think is done by the president in many ways in a crafty and a way that benefits him, there are those times, I mean, you saw it last week in the impeachment hearings, essentially attacking the ambassador or the former ambassador while she was testifying. They may not have said it out loud, but there's nobody in Washington on either side that thought that was productive. It isn't, and it wasn't. And, you know, his average is certainly better than a coin flip, but there are going to be times in which that vitriol and that acceleration of that vitriol is not helped by some of the types of direct engagement that you see.
That's probably true, but at the same time, I also think the people that were watching that impeachment hearing, most of the country probably didn't think the entire thing was very productive and a huge waste of time. So I think that the 30 seconds it took the president to tweet out is far less of a loss of productivity as we've watched as Congress has spent hour after hour, day after day, not getting anything done and instead wasting time on this entire process, which I think everyone knows will ultimately go nowhere and we'll be right back where we started, except the timeline for things like USMCA will be over. American workers will be left behind instead of moving forward when we could have been focusing on really productive things. I don't mean that as a negative towards you, because obviously you're not in Congress, but I think if we want to talk about a lack of productivity, I think the best place to look right now is probably Congress.
All right. So you guys opened the door for impeachment, and obviously we have a lot of questions around impeachment. And Sarah, you kind of gave your thoughts on it. So Robert, I'll let you give yours as well. Where's impeachment going?
Well, I mean, I think the end game has largely been decided. I'd be shocked if he wasn't impeached, and I'd be wildly shocked if anything but acquittal happened.
When you say impeach, you mean there'll be a vote in the House that says let's
Yeah.
impeach him,
Yeah.
and the trial in the Senate will fail.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that mathematically that is almost certain. I watched, I was one of those unproductive people sitting on United Flight 1748 today watching. Today was not a good day to be the president. You got a defense official that testified the Ukrainians knew the aid was being held up when they were on the phone call, and you've got an ambassador that's appointed by the president saying that there was a quid pro quo and it was arranged from the very top and they were executing it. So I think not a good day for him, not a good day for the defense that keeps sort of, I'm not really sure what we're on in terms of volume of of what the message is for why this isn't bad or what this isn't. But I think to me, I think you'll see what will happen in the House likely before Christmas. I think there's a bit of a debate internally on the Republican side of whether to have a very quick trial in the Senate, to have a longer one in the Senate, and actually keep, you talked about unproductive. I think Mitch McConnell wants to have an 8-week trial, or some people do, so that the presidential candidates are not sitting in Iowa or in New Hampshire or Nevada or South Carolina or the other 46 states, but instead listening to what they know is a fait accompli in the Senate. So I think that's likely what's going to happen. I don't expect that you'll see huge numbers of people in the public opinion move, because I think there are very, very few people that have not probably already made up a decent portion of their mind.
Can I just add 2 things on that? One, I actually think if Mitch McConnell does that, it's a mistake, because I think it would be spectacular to have Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders spending all of their time campaigning in any state that they pick, because I think either one of them would be an incredible contrast to this president. Their ideas and their policies are so wildly out of touch with the rest of America that I think it would be a really good thing if we could actually help them spend as much time as possible campaigning so that America can see just how bad their ideas are.
Let's applause more questions.
And my second point is, I think every day that you're president is a great day, because you get to be the leader of the greatest country on the face of the planet. And no matter how bad the day is or how good the day is, being the president of the United States is the privilege and the honor that only a few people will ever hold. And I think it is one of the most incredible roles that you could ever take on. And I think even on its worst day, it's still probably got to be one of the best and most important jobs in the world.
Okay, so I've been adding questions into my questions and summarizing some of them. This one's really good. I'd like to think one of my students wrote it from Chapman. So I'm just going to read it verbatim because I think it is a really important one. When you're hired to speak for someone, the expectation is you'll deliver a message that does the most benefit or least harm to their image. What is your responsibility to the truth when it might be damaging or unflattering to the person you're serving?
You can't go in the room and you can't be an effective spokesperson if you're not grounded in the truth. Because the moment that you begin to tell reporters that are seeking the information that you have, and they realize that they're not getting it from you in a truthful way, they'll stop asking you. You'll become, you're not valuable to them in any way. And look, there were days in which I would go out there and you'd have to answer questions and there weren't good answers, or you'd have to go out and answer questions and they were messy. But if you go out there and you knowingly deceive, again, you're not going to be doing this long. And you're doing a tremendous disservice to the operation of that democracy. If we're not willing to if we're not willing to have this discourse and base it off of a foundation of fact, then it's just talk. And if you don't like your answers and you feel like you have to make them up, get better answers. And I used to do this. I would go, I usually briefed at 1 or 1:15. It would always slip. And I would say to somebody at a 10 o'clock meeting, guys, you don't have an answer to this. And I'm on TV at 1 o'clock. And we can do this one of two ways. Either you fix the policy by 1 o'clock, or turn on any TV in this building and I'll fix the policy at 1 o'clock. Now, I'm not going to make it up, but I'm going to break the tie. And there were a couple of times where they were arguing over something. This was when we were, it was during the first sort of probably 4 or 5 months, and we had a stimulus program where you could you could trade in an older, less environmentally efficient car, get a break if you bought a car. Cash for Clunkers, I think was the name. I remember getting a call from the transportation department, and you know, they'd structured a certain amount of money for the program, and they called me up and they said, you know, like, we think the money's going to run out like mid-afternoon on this day. What do you mean the money's going to, like, what do you, I said, so like, is somebody keeping track? Like, so if I go buy a car at 2:30 and Sarah buys a car at 2:31, is somebody going to tell her that I'm sorry, I got the last money and you don't? And these guys were all arguing about it. And I finally said, guys, 1 o'clock, pick any TV in the White House. And they didn't come to an answer. So I walked out there and I fixed the policy. Program runs all day. Saw the Secretary of Transportation later in the afternoon and he said, we're sorry we didn't get you an answer. We got to go back to Congress to get the money you just spent. But he said, thank you, because we couldn't get to an agreement. And in some ways, I think that briefing is important to be able to do that, to sort of, but you got to be careful. And you know, as the press secretary, you're told things and you've got to, the first probably week of the administration, I noticed that 7 or 8 people were going home with a notebook every night. And I said to my assistant, why do these guys have this briefing book and I don't? And I talked to the staff, and the chief of staff said, well, I figured there's some things you just wouldn't want to know, because if you get asked, you can say you don't know and you don't know. And I said, well, that sounds great, except if I don't know, what good am I? I said, you got to trust me with the information that I can steer around not saying something that I shouldn't say, but at the same time not deceiving that I don't know it. Bob Gates was our Secretary of Defense, and there were a whole series of photos of some soldiers in Iraq had desecrated bodies on the battlefield after they'd been killed. This had been several years before our administration, but these photos had been found, and we had made a pledge to release the photos. Controversial. And I had made that announcement at a briefing, they're working through this. They're trying to get them in basically giving us the ability to release the photos, but we'll make them public. It's going to take us about 10 days to do that. I'll be back to you. And I remember I went out to brief probably about a week later. And right before I went out, I walked to the president, to the Oval Office, to ask him a question on a question I knew that I would get to make sure that we were in sync. And I am walking into the Oval just as the door opens, and Bob Gates and President Obama are walking out. And I get my question to the president, and he says, look, I'm glad you're here. I just talked with Bob. We're not going to release the photos. We had a long conversation about how this is going to put our soldiers in harm's way. I just want you to know that. We got to work through this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great, no worries. Go down, I brief like 45, 50 minutes. Finally, the reporter in the middle of the room says thank you, which means I can now go. And I never should have even looked back. I turned, and I'm starting to walk off this podium right here, and somebody says, hey, when are the photos going to be released? And I'm sitting there thinking in my mind, like, I know the photos aren't going to be released. And I remember I turned around, and I looked, and I thought for a second, and I said, I may have information on that for you sooner than you think on the photos. And I kind of elongated the answer, and now everybody in the room knew something was up. But I remember thinking that split second, if I said, oh no, we're going to do this on Wednesday, or we're going to do this next week, or again, that isn't as much in the realm of deception that I would worry about. That's in the room of, I'm out of the loop. But if anybody in the answer to that question is going out there to say something that's not true in order to make the answer better, I would suggest the best thing to do is get a different profession.
I completely agree with. And to add to that, I think part of it too is that to be an effective spokesperson for somebody else, you have to actually believe in the person or the entity that you work for. And I think that makes such a difference. You can't effectively talk about and, in essence, sell something if you don't believe it yourself. And so I think if you don't support the policies and the agenda of the person that you work for, it's impossible to be effective. The other part of that, and I know this was something that you were very good at, was making sure that you were in sync with the person that you were speaking for. And my understanding is that President Obama was very good about making sure you were present, as was President Trump. He was very good about making sure I was always in the room. And he knew that I couldn't deliver his thinking and his message if I wasn't there to gather all of the information, if I didn't get to see things take place as they were happening, and instead trying to have somebody else explain it to you. And so I think it's incredibly important for whoever that spokesperson is to always be in the room. It was one of the first lessons that sort of got passed down from press secretary to press secretary. I think Marlon Fitzwater was one of the first people to really hammer this home, was you have to be in the room. If anybody tells you that you can't be in the room, then tell them they're welcome to go to the podium, because you can't do your job if you don't have all of the information. And I think that's such a vital part, and something that I'm certainly appreciative that the president understood for me. And again, my understanding is that President Obama and you had a very good relationship, and that makes a huge difference.
And that seems easy, and it isn't always. We did 12 three-hour meetings at the end of the first year, this is the end of 2009, to review our Afghanistan policy and to make recommendations and adjust our troop levels. 12 three-hour meetings, 36 hours. And after the first meeting, the chief of staff comes to me and says, hey, the Pentagon wants you out of the room. These were in the Situation Room. The Pentagon wants you out of the room. And I said, why? And he says, well, because they don't want political people in the room. And I said, well, everyone in the room's political. How are we going to start doing this? And then I said, do they think that he's looking for political information in these meetings? And I remember I reached over on my desk. The great thing, you have a pass at the White House, but the press secretary is so recognizable that I never had to wear it. You probably didn't have to wear it.
It's the best part.
Right. Secret Service knows who you are. They just wave you through. But I reached over, I took my pass, and I handed it to the chief of staff. And I said, well, I just handed it to him. And he said, well, what's that? And I said, well, if I'm not in that meeting, I don't need to be here. Because that same point Sarah just made. If the President of the United States comes out of a 3-hour meeting, which is a teleconference with the generals in Afghanistan, and I brief after that 3-hour meeting, and 45 minutes of questions in that hour-long briefing are about a 3-hour meeting that I just got a 3-minute recap in, what good do you think I am? And I said, I'm sure you can find somebody that would be happy to do the 3-minute recap. But that guy ain't me. And he walked out of the room, and I kept my pass. And in 36 hours of meetings, I spoke for less than 2 minutes. It was the last question of the 12th meeting, after the president had agreed on adding 30,000 troops. He said, how are we announcing this? And my answer was, next Monday at a speech at West Point. That's it. That was my weighty contribution to the 36 hours. But in a safe were pages and pages and pages of notes that I would use, and hundreds of pages of briefing material, because you can't have that discussion with those reporters. You can't be that conduit of the information in that room unless you're hearing and seeing what's happening.
So are you both saying that you never once, while at that podium, knowingly or unknowingly lied?
I can say I never knowingly gave out incorrect information. That doesn't mean that you don't make mistakes and that there aren't moments where you have to come back and fix a number you gave, or you got information that wasn't correct, or things change. I mean, it is a very fluid operation, and things are moving 1,000 miles a minute. And so something that may have been correct when you heard it, that you told to the crowd was right at the time as you knew it, may not have been right at that point. And so certainly there were mistakes and moments, but never knowingly gave out incorrect information.
Yeah, never knowingly did. The challenge the press secretary always has is you're an information gatherer. So if you remember when President Obama sworn in the first time, Justice Roberts messed up the oath a little bit. And I asked the White House counsel the first day I briefed, which was the second day of the administration, and I said, there's nothing wrong. We're all good with this, right? Nope, fine, no big deal. President's signing executive orders, doing all this stuff. Okay, go to the briefing room. I get a question because people were asking questions. Nope. I've talked to the counsel. Counsel's talked to the Supreme Court. Though the oath wasn't word for word, it's still okay. 5 o'clock that afternoon, I get a call. Hey, come down to the Chief of Staff's office. Okay. It's always a bad thing when you walk in the Chief of Staff's office and it's already full. And I said, hey guys, what's up? Justice Roberts is on his way back down to re-administer the oath. And I remember, I won't repeat what I said.
Why not? Come on, just give us a little tea, just a little bit.
Absolutely livid. And I remember talking to the folks in the council. I asked you specifically whether this was a problem. I said, this is day 2, and we are way out over thin ice. And so, and what I said earlier is you've got to be that representative press in the room. So Justice Roberts was coming down. They were going to do this in the map room. We were going to put out a statement at like 10 o'clock that night. Hey, the oath got redone. Everything's cool. Go to bed. See you in the morning. I said, not happening. We're not doing it that way. And I said, you guys have called the shots up to now. I'm my prerogative on this thing. I said, I'm going to go get 3 reporters. I wish to this day that I'd put them in the room. I did not. I put 3 reporters outside of the room where Justice Roberts re-administered the oath. They saw Justice Roberts and Obama come out of the room, and then I had the White House counsel brief the 3 reporters. You do get that nice, like, hey, you know what? Why don't you go tell them why the oath didn't work the first time? Because I've already told them based on your information that it worked. And so you've got to be that advocate, and you've got to, I remember thinking there on the second day, like, it's really hard to gather information. And you've seen this in other White Houses. You saw this in the second Bush administration on Iraq. You had press secretaries that had to get sidelined because they unknowingly passed off what somebody else knowingly knew was a lie. And once that happens, it's really, really hard to go back in that room. And you see this every day. If people don't feel like they're getting the right information, they're distrustful of any of the information that they get. And it creates a cycle whereby nobody trusts anybody else. And if you're not careful, the whole system can collapse very, very quickly.
Okay, I think we are out of time, but I'm going to ask one final and concluding question, which is, we have a lot of students here, 1/3 of the audience, in fact, and for many of them, these are the formative years when they're going to go into the real world. And our mission, obviously, is freedom of the press and free expression and civil discourse. As you leave your speech tonight, any parting words of advice for the students in the audience?
I think the most important thing is to be involved. Obviously, I would prefer you be involved on the Republican side, but I understand that that's probably not a blanket thing. But either side, be involved. Go out, find real information, support candidates, learn about them, get to know them, spend time volunteering on campaigns, and spend time learning about the government that will control so much of your life. Actually get your hands dirty and get involved in the process. Whether you want to be a reporter, go and intern at a newspaper, get involved in some capacity and really learn about the art of whatever it is that you want to do. I think it is so important to really spend time and engage, and I hate to say this, but don't be lazy. Like, take time to really look at information, make sure it's good, look at where it comes from, pay attention to whether or not it's an ad or whether or not it's an actual real news source. But take time to really participate in the process. Don't just take things as it's given to you. And I think the most important thing you can really do is just to be an active participant. Don't just sit back and watch from the sidelines.
Totally agree. I mean, yeah, that's good. Our democracy requires active participation at every level and by every person. And you get the government, you get the elected officials that are worth your time and the time that you put into them. If you want to be a reporter, don't let the economics of what the news business looks like now deter you. There's reporting going on every single day that changes the direction of the country and changes the direction of the world. And that's a really important work. And if you're thinking about going into reporting, it doesn't have to be politics, but if you're thinking about going into reporting, read a book called Bad Blood that came out last year. And you'll understand the power of investigative reporting. And the last thing I'd say, whether you're in politics or whether you're in reporting, I'll build off a little bit Sarah said, be skeptical. Make somebody prove they're right to you. Don't take it on face value that what you hear is right. Put it through the lens of your thinking and your values, and put it on its own treadmill of truth, and seek what is the right answer, and determine that for yourself. And once you do, feel free to give that on and to educate others. But start by looking at everything a little bit skeptically until you are sure of it yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Let's have a round of applause for our speakers, and thank you so much for coming tonight.